Good morning again to those of you that are new, that didn't come to the first session with John Tilling. I hope you've got a good excuse for not turning up. It's our second session of virtual GSE. We've got Lewis James here, young Lewis from Hursley, who did this presentation previously in November at our UK CICS working group conference. Live face-to-face, and now we're doing our virtual one where we're hoping to reach much more people in the community, either in the UK, Europe or overseas. We've seen people logging in from all over, and it's great to see you. If you haven't been before, hopefully you'll enjoy the session and come again. So Lewis, I think this is the first of a couple of sessions you've got this week. And it's on security and compliance with CICS. So without further ado, Lewis, I'll just mention, if anyone's got any questions, you're all on mute. Please put your questions in the chat, and I or Jenny, who's also monitoring the chat, will read them out to Lewis as we go. But there will be time at the end for questions again. So if you want to wait to the end, that's fine. We shouldn't be rushing this session. There should be 5 or 10 minutes at the end for questions. So Lewis, without further ado, please take it away.
Amazing. Thank you very much, Rob. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name's Lewis. For those of you who haven't met me, I work within the CICS TS development team in Hursley, specifically looking at trust and compliance and security. So as Rob said, I presented this back in November, so it's a bit of a repeat of the content. And if you're in this morning's session as well, you'll know from what John told you that CICS 6.1 was had a lot of content in it, and a lot of it was security. So this morning was looking at the foundation enhancements, and then we've got 2 sessions. So one today, which is the one you're in now, for security, and then we've got another security session tomorrow morning looking at diagnosis, and that's just some further enhancements on the security side of things. So let's jump in. So security in CICS TS 6.1. So the theme for this release, which we GA'd just June gone, so about 6-7 months now, was simplification. And this was really decided based on customer research and interviews and collaboration with our business partners and our design partnership. And we've come up with this theme, which actually has 3 pillars within it, and it's compliance, configuration, and diagnosis. So when we were planning on what content to put into 6.1, it was all surrounded around these 3 interrelated problems. And that's directly from talking to customers like yourselves potentially, and understanding where the pain points are within CICS security. So as we go along now in the next hour or so, hopefully you'll see that trend as we start looking at the different features that we've brought into CICS 6.1. And you should see that hopefully we're addressing them 3 problems and really trying to make our customers' lives easier, essentially. So the first thing I wanted to cover for CICS 6.1 security changes is the Cat3 transaction changes. So as most of you probably know, there's 3 categories of transactions within CICS, and a bit of an overview of what these 3 are. As a reminder, we've got the category 1 transactions, which are only run under the region user ID. And we're going to talk around them a bit later, or a bit tomorrow actually, in the other presentation. We've got Cat2 transactions, which are the ones where they're usually initiated by the CICS user, and that's things like CMT and CEDA. And then we've got the Cat3 transactions as well. So these are transactions which are available to everyone. You don't have to be signed in, and there's no security checking per se on these transactions, and they're the ones that we're going to be talking about in this section here. So in terms of looking at this from a security compliance perspective, it is actually better if we cannot change these transactions in terms of their definitions. Before 6.1, when we shipped CICS, we shipped it with the definitions of them transactions, which allow customers to alter them if they needed to. And we've come up with the fact that it's advantageous to know that when a Cat3 transaction is changed from a security point of view, due to the fact there's no security on that transaction, and if we've changed it, there could be a security vector there in terms of initiating maybe a different program that isn't the intended initial program shipped with CICS. So we've come up with this new term, and it's to make Cat3 transactions protected. So I'm going to say the word protected in this presentation, and that's what I'm referring to. And what it means is it's allowing us to define these Cat3 transactions within CICS as protected, which means we cannot alter them. Now, from talking to customers, from kind of going through our support cases and speaking to our service team who talk to our clients on a daily basis, we know that there are some transactions which have a legitimate reason to be altered, which are Cat3 transactions. So only a subset of, well, 22 of the Cat3 transactions are going to be protected. So what do we mean by protected? Well, it means that we cannot use CIDR to alter them, and we cannot use any other altering techniques to change what that Cat3 transaction invokes. So what happens if we start CICS with an altered Cat3 transaction? We get a message within the log to basically say that a Cat3 transaction could not be replaced. So we will ignore any alterations to the transaction to ensure that we've still got integrity within our definition there. And then in terms of a CIDR point of view, when we try to do an install, we get the same or similar error message to say that it's a protected transaction, protected definition. So there are 10 Cat3 transactions that can actually be altered. Again, we spoke to our customers. We understand that there is a business need sometimes to change these certain transactions. However, we don't want to completely leave them at a point where they're unprotected, essentially. So what we've done is we've added a new ZOS health check test, and we're going to go into the health checker later in this presentation of what we've done in 6.1, but it essentially allows us to notify the sysprog that we have got altered Cat3 transactions, and to really make sure that we understand them transactions aren't invoking their intended initial program. So we'll also issue a new CICS message for this, so we can see it's a message in the log which simply says that particular transaction does not invoke its initial program. And then in terms of looking at the health check tests that we've added, we've got a whole new category of tests which ensures that all the Cat3 transactions which can be altered are covered in tests, so we can see in our health check report that this is an exception, and we can go in and address it should we not have actually changed that. Okay, and that nicely leads us on to the next section, which is around the new health checks for CICS. Okay, so this is a big range of work that we've done to try to make it more, our CICS regions more compliant, and for us to have visibility of that as well. So the health checker, I imagine most people within the call know what the IBM health checker is, but it allows us to detect configuration problems and understand potential flaws in our systems before they cause impacts on our systems. So it's supposed to be a preventative thing. We're supposed to be able to detect it before it causes an issue, and it programmatically checks all of the tests, and it will go through sysplex settings and definitions, and it will output a report with some detailed messages which informs of any basically potential problems. A little bit of a history lesson for the health checker. It's been available since ZOS 1.4, and this is around, well, it was part of the base product since 1.7, so it's automatically within within ZOS, and it's been on from default since ZOS 2.1, which was in 2013. We can look at the health check output with the CK option in SDSF, and IBM already has 150 health checker checks by default, and they have 3 states: success, warning, and exception. So it's really easy to understand the state of the tests as well. So to actually use the health checker in CICS, there is no configuration required. As I said, it's part of the base product of ZOS, and it's automatically on with CICS. We don't have to do any configuration and we can't get it wrong, which is always a good thing, especially in security. So what if we have a look in the next slide, we can start to see what we had before CICS 6.1, which we had these 3 groups of tests, which was, they were limited. We had a set amount of tests in CICS 5.4, and that's something we've expanded on now. So you can see in red there, the SDSF view of them tests, and you can see the states as well. So exception low, successful, and that is still the same format, except we've got 5 new health check groups, which allow us to have more visibility of the compliance of the system. So you can see notably at the top there, in the top red one, we've got the Cat3 configuration, which goes back to what we said in the last section around how we're checking to make sure them Cat3 transactions are invoking their initial program. Was there a message in chat, Rob?
So yes. So the question is, do we need separate license for the IBM Health Checker for CICS, or is it come as part of the base product?
It is part of the base product. That was since 2.1. So it was on the slide previously. If I get back. Yeah, so it's part of the base product since 1.7, and it's on by default from 2.1. So no, I don't think there's anything extra to do there. No worries. So let's have a look at the old style output of the health checker outputs. So we've got essentially a table which gives us some of the details of that output. So you've got the region user ID, the Apple ID, the job name, and kind of the basic stuff there, including the CICS version. We've got a line per output, which basically gives us the error code and some indication of what went wrong. So let's have a look at the new test before we look at what it looks like now. So our tests are now grouped as well. So there was no point us putting all of these tests in one big group because trying to go through the output and really understand what went wrong would have been a bit of a task. So we've tried to split things up as to not clutter the output report, and it's all grouped in a really consumable way now. So we've got our Cat3 configuration tests, which again checks our 10 transactions which can be changed. We've got the region configurations, which has 13 tests for different SIP parameters to make sure we're at the correct or the most secure setting. So for example, making sure security is on, for example. We've got the resource configuration to check some resources. We've got resource security, which looks at our exit parameters around security, and our security on USS configuration as well. So there is quite a lot of tests there, which have been added in 6.1. Now, this is the new style of message that we've implemented, and it's really clear to see what has gone wrong. So at the very top there, we've got the timestamp and the date. We've got the Apple ID and the user ID and the CICS version. And then we've also got the exception messages, warning messages, and information messages underneath, which is really clear for us to see, in this case, that security is no, which is obviously not recommended. It's grouped by CICS region. So we don't, I think before it may have been grouped by potentially the test or the warning message, whereas now we're talking about the CICS region, which is a lot more consumable again. And we've also got this unique error message for each check. So what we can do is we can take that error message and we can put it into the IBM docs, and it will tell us how to go about solving that issue. We've also got a summary in the report as well, which tells us how many regions were checked, and also the number of exception messages. So we can see in this case, there was 116 exceptions. So somebody has got a bit of a task to go through that. And again, like I said about the documentation, all these new message IDs have got a standard message ID doc page, as we usually do with the messages in CICS, which has an explanation, a system action, an operator response and also the sysprog response. So how do we actually go about making sure that we can basically solve the issue that is there? So to summarize on the health checks that we've implemented in 6.1, we've got 5 new groups of tests, and these test various areas of CICS to make sure we're at the most compliant recommendations. So all the messages have an ID, which allows us to check the documentation, and it should be really simple to understand how we fix that as well. So on to the next section of region tagging. Now, again, this feeds in from the health checker, so we'll talk about that, and it allows us to have some configuration options with the health checker. But what is CICS region tagging? Well, we had this discussion with customers, and we understand that customers actually have a requirement to know the purpose of a CICS region. And at the moment, we spoke to our sponsored users and our design partnership. And what we really gauged from that conversation was that most of our customers up until now have got spreadsheets of all their CICS regions, and it tells them metadata really about who the region's owned by, who's responsible for it. Is the region a TOR? Is it an AOR? What sort of applications does it have on it? And we've really understood that with the new health check tests, we need a way to control them tests, because realistically, on something like a development region, we don't necessarily need to run all of the tests. And we could maybe, when we want to disable them based on what is going on in that CICS region. Now, as it stands before 6.1, there's not really a programmatical way to do that, because we don't know what that CICS region does, except for looking in our spreadsheet, for example. So we've come up with CICS tags, which is a new mechanism which allows us to simply put a tag to a CICS region. And this isn't a kind of one-to-one relationship, as you can see in the diagram. CICS 1 could be an AOR, a TOR, and production. CICS 3 could just be test. And that really gives us a starting point to understand which regions might need the health checks running. Now, we've spoke to customers and again looked at that Excel spreadsheet or CSV spreadsheet to understand how they identify these regions. So we've made the decision to be able to tag a CICS region by its Apple ID, region user ID, or the job name, as that's currently what people are really doing with the spreadsheet. And we've also looked at how we can include a mechanism to support the current naming convention, because whereas some companies or some clients might have hundreds and thousands of CICS regions, they potentially use a naming convention such as T to indicate the test, which might be in the job name, or A to indicate that it's an AOR. And we wanted to allow that to be consumable to transfer over to our tagging mechanism rather than having to manually specify each tag all the time. So it's all well and good talking about this new mechanism, but how do we actually specify that a region is a certain has a certain metadata? How do we give it a tag? Well, we've implemented a new file, and this file sits within HFS in the USS config directory, and it's written in YAML, specified in YAML. And we, with CICS 6.1, ship a sample tagging file, which is ready to go, so we can use that. We can change it, and it also gives us lots of examples of tags, and I'll show that a bit later on. And we've also produced a schema as well. So this JSON schema allows us to guide and police the syntax of the tagging file for somebody who maybe doesn't necessarily know all the syntax for that. So we really try to make sure you can't get it wrong. And so, for example, if you do something wrong, you'll get an error. And that is supported by most IDEs, for example, VS Code. So let's have a look at the tagging file. So what we've done with the sample file is we've supplied some tags and we've prefixed them all with CICS TS. So there's two terms here. We've got the CICS tag type, and for the tag type, there can be multiple tags. So in this first case, we've got CICS TS region types, and we've got multiple tags under that. So we've got the terminal owning region. we have got the AOR and the QOR. And the tag can be up to 80 characters long. We're not really, technically, I imagine a tag wouldn't practically be 80 characters long, but we've made it possible for that. And we can also see that we can basically set the criteria of being tagged by using the Apple ID or the job name. Now, we've also, talking about the conventions, we've got wildcard support as well. So should you use a question mark within any of the criteria fields, that allows us to basically say any character can be in this area. So in that case where you use T for test. And we've also got an asterisk to say anything after this point we don't care about. We just care about the first 4 characters, for example. So that can be, you can see there, dev 12 asterisk, and you've got question marks. So it's really good, and it allows us to transfer from our CSV spreadsheet files to the actual tagging mechanism, and we can hopefully use it to identify our CICS regions. So what is this unique tag? What is this unique flag? Well, that basically says that if we have unique yes, that a CICS region can only be applied to one of the tags. And the way that works is it works on the best match of the criteria. So for example, in the case where we've got the development tag, if we've got the Apple ID of special 1, and that is explicit and the Apple ID is special 1, we will tag that into development rather than, for example, production, where we might use wildcard characters. And we have a scoring system to say development best matches this CICS region due to the criteria that we specified. So if it's an exact match, it's going to be tagged against that one. Should it best match multiple tags within the tag type, we take the first one. So we've also got the potential for you to create your own tags. So we have shipped our CICS TS prefixed tags and tag types, but actually we don't know what the client wants to, what metadata they want to provide against their regions. So in this case, we've shown an example. Maybe we've got a user-defined tag where we want to signify a responsible person. And in this case, we can see that we've tagged Darren Beard, who's a developer within CICS, his Apple ID against him. So we know that it's his CICS region. So that's just another example of how we can use it. So obviously the first use of tagging is really to be able to identify the metadata against a CICS region in a more structured and formal way. But the other use we've really got is going back to the health checks that we've added, them 38 new tests. We might not necessarily want to run them in a development or a test region, for example. So we're giving the client the opportunity to exclude certain tags from being run within the health checker. So for example, if we scroll down in that sample file, we can exclude the development and test regions from running the health checks, which is really good. It means that we don't have to go through, we don't get a lot more exceptions within our health check report for regions that don't necessarily need to be checked. And we can actually go and specifically remove a specific health check from all of the regions. So how have we made this more consumable for the user is we've actually provided a formal SPI for inquiring on the tag. So in CICS, we can do an exec CICS inquire tag, and that allows us to browse through the tags associated with the region that we run that command on. And we've also provided a refreshing interface so that we can alter the tagging file without shutting down CICS. And as with most SPI, we've supported this within the Explorer. Now, in this case, we've only got one region, but if we had a CICSplex with, say, 20 regions, we'd be able to select that as a context, and we could see the tags across 20 different regions. And this is where you can start hopefully seeing the value of this. So in this case, we've got 3 columns being the region, the actual tag type, and the tag value. So we can filter on that and sort that, and that hopefully allows us to identify a region against some certain metadata. Again, it's we've provided an interface to refresh that tagging file from the Explorer as well as the command that I've just spoke about. Okay. So the next section is talking about security compliance. So in CICS, how does the auditor determine whether we meet compliance regulations? Well, technically, the auditor has to understand and interpret the regulations of ZOS, and they have to decide what data is then required from our system programmer to determine whether them regulations are compliant. They then got to analyze that data retrieved and make the decision at that point based on their own understanding of our regulations, whether or not the CICS region or the LPAR meets the state of compliance. And already kind of talking through this process, there are clear fundamental issues with this. So if we look at Auditor Amy here, who may have little experience within CICS or little experience with ZOS, we might have the fact that interpretation is relative to Amy. So she might think one thing and another auditor might think another thing. And then how does she actually go from getting that data to actually understanding whether or not it meets that regulation that she's interpreted? And also, how does she know what data to ask the SysProg for? So these are all questions which are a little bit worrying, because the audit, technically, different auditors can come up with different answers. And someone like Amy might be used to auditing security compliance within a Windows server, for example. And then we get questions like, well, where's the antivirus on ZOS? And things like that. So kind of very, very non-specific stuff to Z. And this is where the issue lies. So we've tried to address this within CICS 6.1. And how have we done this? So how can we make her life easier? So the idea is that we automate as much compliance data collection in CICS as humanly possible. And this is a win-win solution, because the auditor does not need to know CICS or ZOS very well. And the data collection is less expensive because we don't have to ask a system programmer to go away and get all this data and collate it and send it over email or send it over another form of communication. And the information that we're giving to the auditor and that the auditor is taking is consistent and accurate, and it interprets based on the regulations that we've got. So we don't have that variable difference from each different auditor. So how do we actually collect the compliance data within CICS? So we've got two routes for doing this. So we've got using the ZSCC, which is a fairly new product external to CICS. And that allows us for data visualization based on compliance. And I'm going to show that a little bit later. And we've also got a RESTful interface for those of you who don't have the ZSCC product. So if we're using the ZSCC, how do we go about collecting this data? So the ZSCC can send in through the ZOS compliance agent an event. And this triggers CICS to start the data collection process. And these are pre-programmed protocols to go and get predefined data. CICS will then take that data and record it within a new SMF record. And it goes within a dedicated log stream, which is only exclusive for the compliance side of things. And that then takes it back to the ZSCC, which allows visualization. So what does that actually look like when we get back to the ZSCC? It looks something like this. So we can see we can see kind of the compliance of each region. Now, if you think of it from Auditor Amy's point of view, she might not really know a huge amount about CICS or the regulations, but if she looks at it in something like this, where we've got visualization of whether or not the data or whether or not the region is compliant, it's a lot easier to understand and then kind of go from there. Obviously, again, the ZSCC is something not base included within ZOS. It's a paid extra product. So we had to, in CICS, come up with a way to make this more consumable for all our clients. So if we don't have access to the ZSCC, what do we do? Well, we've got a RESTful interface within CICS, and this is an authorized public interface, ZOSMF, and we can send in a request to the compliance agents. And again, that same event is fired as was before. And then we start collecting the compliance data the same as before, and this gets put into an SMF record. But instead, what happens here is that in CICS 6.1, we've supplied a sample job, which allows us to simply run it and collect all that data from the SMF record and put it into a really consumable format. So the collection process in itself, no matter whether it's done by ZSCC or from a RESTful interface, is done by the CHCK task. And what sort of data do we actually collect? Because we haven't really talked about this. So we actually look at information such as the SIP parameters of the system, the tags, so going back to our tagging, and that's also really useful because it allows our auditor to understand what a region does. So should a development region come back as non-compliant, it's really clear to understand what that region is doing rather than presuming it's a production region and then setting all the alarm bells off that we're not compliant there. We've also got PTF numbers as well and the date of the module that's loaded. And we've got TCP/IP service definitions, and that's just a subset of the information that we collect. Now, all this data is going within an SMF 1154 type 80 record, and we can see how this data looks when we process it as well. So if we have a look at this spreadsheet, the job actually outputs a summary report, and we also get a CSV file. And this means that our auditor can open up this file in any spreadsheet program of their choosing, such as Excel. And we can see all of the regions that were on that selected LPAR. We can see all of the different data, such as the SIP parameters, the default user, the Apple ID. And the brilliant thing about this is there's no extra configuration required to get this data out. So it's really easy. It's a set process within CICS, and we don't require CPSM for this either. Now, again, as I said with the tagging side of things, filtering is really easy for this. But if we open it with a spreadsheet program, that kind of comes part and parcel with that program. So we can then filter on things such as the region, the Apple ID, the user ID, and data that we really want to know about. And then we've also got another page within that CSV, which looks at the tagging. So this is another use for the region tagging. And that allows us to say, well, we know what this region does because we know that Colin Penfold owns the region, for example, or we know that it's a TOR, and maybe this particular region is non-compliant, but actually we know it's a testing region. So we can then look into that, and that changes things slightly. Another really useful thing is it also shows the 5 most recent loaded PTFs as well, and that ensures that we're running with the same version as the SMP target library as well. So again, we can use the filtering within the spreadsheet program to filter on things like tags. And then we can look at whether the region is production, test, and development, and then again, understand whether it's compliant or not. Now, I appreciate that was a lot of information, and we finished very early, so I'm happy to take as many questions as possible. But yeah, thank you very much for listening. I understand there's a lot of information there. That's just covering the compliance side of CICS 6.1. And we have another session tomorrow morning, which is a lot more around the internals and around diagnosis and statistics and things like that. So yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much, James. There's a lot of changes around security. Some of them, dare I say it, particularly in the manuals, long overdue. And we've got another session, and we know that IBM's working very hard on security at the moment. There are a lot of initiatives coming along, things like Zero Trust, that we all need to be aware of. I don't know about everybody on this call, but it's a typical thing for people to protect everything with Xtran. years ago, we just didn't have the MIPS or the CPU to do resource level security, even though IBM very graciously have given us all these SIT options to put those in place. So there might be some changes afoot in the next few years, dare I say it, for all of us, sort of Sarbanes-Oxley type requirements from the auditors asking us to do things that traditionally we haven't done, and that's maybe available now. I know a lot of it will be a challenge for some of us with big and complex sites, but I know that IBM are working very hard to give us the tools that we need. So if anyone has got any questions, you can put in the chat now. We can always take things offline. And there is, as James has said, a second security session later in the week where we'll be covering some more security topics. And I'm sure those of you that are interested on this call will be interested on that one as well. If I can ask you to leave feedback, unfortunately, I haven't cut and pasted the link, but it's there on the screen on the website. I'd really appreciate that. But really, I'm just going to say, if there's no chats.
Well, there's one in the chat, which is from Sharon, asking about how does CSV file show conformity. Okay, so yeah, so the CSV file, if I just pop back to it. So we've got obviously the two kind of main areas of the CSV. You're absolutely right. It doesn't necessarily show black or white whether or not that region is conforming to the regulations, but it has to. So yeah, you do say which will require the auditor to analyze. That's absolutely true. So because obviously we're producing this information for the auditor, we can't say yes, this conforms with the regulations, because as CICS we can't define the regulations. That's for the auditor to do, and it wouldn't be ethical for us to basically say that we in ourselves are compliant, if you get what I mean. So we supply the data for them to make that decision themselves, but they ultimately have to do the analysis still, albeit we kind of spoon feed them that data and they can do that what they will with that. But yeah, it still does require them to make that decision.
Yeah. And I think what we will find going forwards into the future, as happened in the past, is that auditors change their minds about what is compliant and what isn't. So we kind of set these rules up, and their degree of tolerance for some of these things depends on their experience of other platforms rather than the mainframe nowadays, as you mentioned earlier on in your presentation. And to a certain extent, yeah, you know, nothing stays the same. So we do have to adapt our game sometimes. But
it's a fluid thing, isn't it?
Yeah, you're giving us all the information now, but it is up to others to make decisions, and they might have less experience than we do, so it might create some interesting situations. Anybody else got any questions to pop in the chat? We've got plenty of time left. Okay. I'm thinking not. Let me just pull up the next session. Try and do things properly. I think it's worth mentioning that you've got 4D up there and it's session 4B.
Oh, fine.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so I have.
Yeah, no worries. I should be cutting and pasting the link like Jenny did earlier on, and I'm just on the wrong desktop.
I think 4D is my other session, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. Apologies. Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. So the next session is at 12. It's Java, so I'm just clicking on the link. I'm pretty sure it'll be Phil Wakelin. So those of you interested in Java and CICS, we'll see you back on here in Virtual Room 4 at 12 o'clock UK time. So thank you for your time, everyone, and see you soon.
Cheers.
Thank you so much, Liz.